Hello and welcome to Alyssa Jean's Reviews, and welcome to my Star Trek Top 100 number one. This will be the video about my all-time favorite episode in the Star Trek franchise, and we have been building up to this since May, and it is now December, so more than 6 months. We've been working our way up to number one. It's been a long road getting from there to here. I'm just gonna say, although my number one is not from Star Trek Enterprise, I will just give you that little spoiler. So normally what I've been doing in this top five is starting with a review of my picture clue, and then giving shout outs to anyone who guessed it correctly. But this time, because it's my number one, I want to do a build up to it and the echoey voice and my number one theme song. I don't know if you guys have noticed, if you have watched enough of my top tens, that I have a theme song for my number one. I play the same background music for number one every single time. I don't know who's picked up on that, but I'm going to play that music and I'm going to, do the whole thing and build up to it to introduce what my number one is. And then after that, I will do the picture clue review, and then I will do my overview of the episode. And then I have kind of a little thing that I need to talk about with the episode, and then I will go into the recap. So this will be a long video. All right, let us go ahead and get into my number one in the Star Trek franchise.
And now, ladies, gentlemen, and people of all genders, my number one greatest Star Trek episode of all time.
And my number one of the entire Star Trek franchise, out of my entire Star Trek Top 100, is The City on the Edge of Forever from the first season of Star Trek, the original series. This is, for me, the greatest episode of all time in all of Star Trek. It is my opinion, but it is, for me, the best episode in the franchise. So, before I get into more on why this is, for me, the best episode in the franchise, let's go ahead and take that step back and review the picture clue. So, for those of you who don't know already, I do a picture clue the week before I release my videos, which reveals what the episode is, if only you can decipher the clue. So, let me show you what the clue is. Here it is right here. This, of course, does lead to the city on the edge of forever, but I needed more than just, oh, there's a city on the edge and the word ever is in here. Or I have deduced by process of elimination that it must be city on the edge of forever. I needed the exact explanation. And the exact explanation is that this is a city on the edge of the ocean. And in that ocean, there are 4 evers. So you see the word ever 1, 2, 3, 4 times. So this is the city on the edge of 4 evers. However, there is an S with a circle and a line through it. So you take the S out of that. So it is not city on the edge of 4 evers. It is, in fact, the city on the edge of forever. Ta-da! And so a big, huge shout out to Liz Scott and Maddie Jester for not only getting the correct answer, but the correct reasoning as well. Good job. You are the champions. In fact, Liz doubted herself because she thought it was almost too easy. I did hear from other people that didn't get it. Like, they knew what the number one was, but they couldn't get the reasoning. I think not everyone is going to think to count the number of evers. You're going to be like, oh, okay, it's sitting on the edge of forever, but I don't get it. So your brain has to go to, we have to count that there are 4 evers, and I don't think everybody necessarily will do that. And that turned out to be the case. So it might have been easy for you because your brain went straight to counting the evers, but not everybody does. So It is City on the Edge of Forever. Liz Scott, congratulations for being the grand champion. The grand champion of the picture clues. She got 3 correct, and a runner-up shout out to Manny Jester, the runner-up champion. Can't be runner-up grand champion, but runner-up champion. Manny Jester got 2.5 correct. I gave him half credit for yesterday's Enterprise because he got half of the clue and he got the correct episode, but he did not get that Adam Sandler from The Wedding Singer represented yesterday. So he didn't get that. So I can't give him full credit. So he gets 2.5 correct, whereas Liz Scott got 3 correct and is the ultimate grand champion in Alyssa Jean's picture clues. Congratulations, Liz. You have my undying gratitude and devotion. for that's the only prize you get. I don't have any prizes. Sorry. So you win. Good job, Liz. All right, now let's move away from the picture clue and let us get into my overall thoughts on the episode itself of City on the Edge of Forever. Okay, so my number one, The City on the Edge of Forever from Star Trek, the original series. So I think this episode is generally thought of as being one of the best of the franchise, but I don't know how many other people would necessarily name it the absolute best of the franchise besides me. I think back to a few months ago where my brother Mark from Enchantment of Eternity and myself, we did a top 10 all-time original series episode list that was voted on by our subscribers. So our subscribers would make their top 10s and we would give each one a certain number of points and tally the points and see which one came out as number one. And City on the Edge of Forever was in the top 10. I can't remember where it landed, but it was not number one. And the number one on that list, as voted by you, the subscribers of Alyssa Jean's reviews and Enchantment of Eternity, was The Balance of Terror. The Balance of Terror is in my top 100 back at number 39. It is in my top 10 of the original series. I believe it's probably at number 5 or 6 or 7 or something like that. But it's not my favorite in the original series and is certainly not my favorite in my top 100. And the reason why I would definitely have City on the Edge of Forever way above Balance of Terror, and I do it is in fact 38 spots above it, is mostly to do with nostalgia and how I was raised and how I thought of each episode when I was first really getting into Star Trek and really being drawn into this world back when I was a kid, which for me, we're talking about the 80s. So this is after it had aired originally by about 20 years, but also before the Next Generation. So TOS was all I had. And Balance of Terror at that time was boring as fuck for me. I just fell asleep during it. I did not get it. It was boring. I grew to appreciate that episode as I got older, and it is, of course, at number 39 in my top 100. It is in my top 10 original series episodes now, but because I was able to appreciate it more as an adult. Whereas City on the Edge of Forever, for the very first moment I saw it as a kid, I can't remember how old I was, under 10 years old, I'm sure. It grabbed me and held on to me for my entire life. And as I got older, I appreciated more the nuances. I appreciated more of the details, which I'll talk about as I go through my recap. I think initially, as the best that I can recall, that I was really fascinated in time travel. I do remember watching the original movie of the time travel, based off the time travel, the Time Machine, the Time Machine novel by H.G. Wells. I remember watching that movie when I was really young. And of course, time travel was in all the different Saturday morning cartoons that I watched. I remember Superman traveling back in time and Super Friends and stuff like that. Like time travel was very much a part of all the shows that I watched as a kid, and I was always very fascinated by it. So I was immediately drawn in, of course, by the Guardian of Forever. I thought it was a really fascinating concept. I remember just being mesmerized by the Guardian of Forever. I'll talk about those noises that it makes a little bit later. And then I felt like I was really drawn in to the story and this idea that there are two possible futures and they all come back to one point and one fixated point, and that being Edith Keeler. And maybe I didn't understand it quite on the same level as I do now, but I remember immediately being captivated by that concept. And then as I grew older, of course, learned more about history and all those sorts of things. The idea of this alternate history where the Nazis won was fascinating to me. It's unfortunate that Enterprise, I don't think, did a great job with that concept. But in any event, like all that was really fascinating for me. But I think first and foremost, it's the story, it's the characters, it's the power of the tragedy, like the ultimate tragedy where in order to save millions, you have to sacrifice the one you love. This is the ultimate tragedy. And you can write that out, you can put that up on the screen and not do it well. But this was absolute perfection. And the most astounding thing to me about this episode, watching this now, is that William Shatner is a good actor. I'm sorry. He's not a good actor generally. I've heard, sometimes the director gets credited, probably. I've always kind of credited Joan Collins because I think Joan Collins was an amazing actress. And so I always thought like maybe she brought William Shatner up to her level. And it's probably a combination of both. Joseph Penvey was the director. He directed a lot of original series episodes. I was looking at some of his credits and I did not notice, I don't think I saw all of them. He did 14. I don't think I saw all of them listed, but I did not notice any other ones standing out that were Kirk romances, because most Kirk romances fucking sucked. Like, let's just be real. They were superficial. They were the romance of the week. They were just an excuse for Kirk to, get laid or whatever. I mean, didn't get laid on screen, but you know what I mean. Where this was actually a real, genuine human connection that Kirk has with a woman that he meets. And they don't even really kiss that much in this episode. It's just all about this real heartfelt connection, which makes the tragedy that much more powerful. And I really do have to give a lot of credit for William Shatner for this particular episode. I think this is the best acting job of his life. Like, I don't think he ever does anything this good ever again. It is so good. And Joan Collins, of course, also freaking amazing. So no matter how many times I've seen this episode, I can never get tired of it. I appreciate it anew every time I see it. It just gets me right here every time. It is tragic. It is powerful. It is everything that Star Trek aspires to be. It is everything that a Star Trek time travel episode should aspire to be. I think the absolute best compliment that I can give a Star Trek episode, which I did give to Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow from Strange New Worlds, is that it is City on the Edge of Forever-esque. Now, Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow is nowhere near as good as City on the Edge of Forever as no episode ever will be. No episode will top this. No time travel episode will top this. But to even say this reminds me of City on the Edge of Forever, or it's City on the Edge of Forever-esque, that's a huge compliment, because this is the greatest episode in Star Trek, and certainly the greatest time travel episode in Star Trek. All right, now it's going to be a long time before I get to the actual recap, which is what this video is supposed to be, because I do have one more order of business. There is a scene in this episode that is, let's just say it's racist. So I need to address that and how I reconciled including making an episode that includes that racist scene as my number one favorite Star Trek episode. So I have to address that. So let me talk about that first, and then we can jump finally into the recap. Okay, so let's get into that scene that is unfortunately racist, and I just can't do this video as my number one Star Trek episode uh, without addressing this. I can't just pretend that it doesn't exist. So I'm talking about the scene where Kirk and Spock have first traveled back in time. They are encountered by a police officer. Um, and it's played for comedy because Kirk was just saying, "Oh, this is going to be easy. These people are primitive. I can convince them of anything. It'll be easy to explain your ears or whatever." And right at that moment, the police officer comes up, and then Kirk is like, and he can't explain it. Unfortunately, his first words are, "Well, obviously he's Chinese," which we know now is extraordinarily racist. I do not want to see any comments arguing that it's not racist. I have done videos in the past about how another episode, Paradise Syndrome, is racist, and I've gotten comments, "Oh, it's not racist." No, you're as a white person, you have no right to say that. It is objectively racist. There's no debate. They're referring to Spock's facial features, maybe his pointed eyebrows. I'm not sure, but that makes him Chinese, and that is an unfortunate stain on this episode. So my first instinct is to dismiss it as it's the 60s. Like, they didn't know better. There is no way in hell Modern Trek would ever have a line like that. Like, I can't imagine like Michael Burnham or Anson Mount's Christopher Pike saying, about Spock, "Oh, obviously he's Chinese." Like, it would be disgusting. There's no way that they would ever think in a million years to do that. But in the 60s, white people were not as informed as we are now, hopefully, and the knowledge was not out there, and the empathy was not out there. We were just learning to maybe have a little bit of empathy, some of us, for African American people, but Native Americans, Asians, other ethnic groups didn't give a second thought about. And I like to think we've come a little bit of a way, like we've made some progress since then, because I don't think there's any way, at least in Star Trek, that we were ever do that. And that's not to say that racism has been solved, because we're far from that, but I feel like that would not happen in Modern Trek. So in the 60s, it's the 60s. And it's one inconsequential line. It is not embedded into the fabric of the episode. The episode does not depend on the racism like Paradise Syndrome does. And yes, Paradise Syndrome is a racist episode. And I know some people just don't want to count racism against Native Americans because it was so commonplace in the 60s Westerns, but it counts. So it's a racist episode. Or an episode in the 80s from Next Generation, The Code of Honor, which is generally thought of to be the most racist episode. The racism is embedded in the fabric of the episode. If you take the racism out, you don't have an episode. Whereas here, you could take that line out and the episode is totally fine. I might argue that you should take that line out for the streaming services. I just watched it. It's still there. I think... unfortunately, you can't really remove the whole scene. I would personally remove the whole scene if you could, because I think it's a dumb gag and doesn't need to be there. But it does lead to a scene where Kirk explains to Edith Keeler that they were running from a police officer. Now, if you were to reshoot it, you could take it out, but it's just edit it out. It wouldn't really make sense. So you do need that scene. But I think you can take out the line, "I am Chinese." Or he is Chinese. Sorry, he's obviously Chinese. I think you can take that line out, and then that maybe takes a little away this of the sting of the Chinese the rice picker. He says he got his head caught in a rice picker, which I think is another cultural reference, another racist reference. But if you take away the line, "He's obviously Chinese," then maybe the rice picker thing doesn't necessarily have racist connotations. So I think you could just pull that line out. And I would argue you should, but the episode is fine. The episode does not come unraveled. I did have to think a lot about, am I just saying this because I'm white? Would I say this if I were Asian? And I don't know the answer to that, because I can't put myself. I don't know what I would think and feel if I were Asian because I'm not. So I tried to think of it more along the lines of, well, what if that was a transphobic line instead? Would I be able to still make this my number one? Because that is something that I can relate to. Again, it's not 100% because I don't know because it's not a transphobic line. But if it were, I tend to think that I would cringe, get a little, just feel bad, but also be like, it's the '60s. Like I feel worse about things like that are now in the here and now, than I do about things that were in the '60s. So I don't think it would prevent me from making it my number one, because again, it's not. It wouldn't be transphobia that is embedded in the fabric of the episode, like in episodes such as Prophet and Lace, where it's transphobia and misogyny is embedded into the very fabric of the episode, whereas this wouldn't be. So that is why I'm, probably white splaining. I don't know. I don't know. That's why I'm feeling like I can still have this as my number one because it is still the greatest episode in Star Trek, even if it does have that one unfortunate line that probably should just be taken out for streaming services, quite frankly. All right, so now finally that is all out of the way, we can get into my recap, starting from the beginning of the episode, going to the end. Okay, let's get into the recap. So we start with our cold open, which is pretty straightforward. It's just to set up the episode. The ship is being shaken by time anomalies. You see everybody go shake around. It's fun to watch. Like there's an ensign in the background or a yeoman who just kind of is not a very good actor. Just like he's not good at shaking, but you pick up on these things after you watch the episode a million times. But yeah, so the ship is shaking. Sulu gets injured. McCoy comes in, gives him a shot of a really powerful drug that revives him. Then McCoy accidentally injects himself with the drug when the ship shakes again. Another one of these time quakes, I will call it. And he injects himself with an unreasonable amount of the drug, and it makes him go mad. And that's the end of the cold open. Then we get into the opening credits. In my mind, I was thinking like the cold open went closer to the Guardian than Forever scene, but this actually makes sense as a good cutoff point. You can't have a cold open be too long. So then we get the opening credits. Ooh, blah, blah, blah. Then after the credits, they are trying to find McCoy. He is running around the ship. He is mad. It's funny how the time quakes stop at this point. Like, you notice how there aren't anymore for plot convenience, but whatever. It's one of those things that you gotta allow to happen for plot convenience. And it's just I like to poke fun at those sorts of things, but it doesn't bother me. You may notice that I do things like this in all of my top 5. Anyways, so McCoy then goes to the transporter room and does the Kirk karate chop to knock out the transporter chief. Since only Spock does the Vulcan nerve pinch, so everyone else has to do this karate chop that no way in hell would knock anyone out. But it's Star Trek. Kirk does it all the time. Other people do it. It's the way of knocking people out, and plays the same music. So he beams himself down to the planet. So then Kirk takes an away team to go after him. So they get on the planet by the Guardian, and there's all these like weird noises. If you listen carefully, in the background, there is the same noise that is heard in the episode The Cage, which was said to be the singing of the plants, which to me always sounded like very similar to a transporter, like it's the same exact noise, but it is overshadowed by the noise of the Guardian Forever going woo, like this wind, kind of wind-like noise. Woo. Now, on the one hand, it does seem a little cheesy. It is definitely very 60s, and yet it is effective. I mean, it was effective for me as a kid when I first watched it. It's just setting up this really ominous kind of place, this really mysterious place. Like, where are we? What is going on? So yes, it's cheesy 60s, but it's also very effective. So McCoy, for some reason, is just hanging out, hiding behind a rock. I don't know what he was doing there. He comes out screaming, and this is where the Vulcan nerve pinch comes in. Spock doesn't need to do the karate chop; he's got the Vulcan nerve pinch. But somehow the effects don't last that long on McCoy, as he maybe the drugs just give him superpowers. As he wakes up after a little bit, jumps in to the Guardian of Forever. Then they try to call the ship, but there is no signal, and that is when the Guardian reveals to them that McCoy has changed the past. That the Earth that they once knew no longer exists. They are totally alone. There's a big moment with Kirk saying, "We are totally alone," and it goes to commercial. Dramatic music. I don't love that they have Ahura go, "I'm frightened." I think I've mentioned this in other episodes. I think I mentioned this in some of the other TOS episodes that I probably mirror other episodes where they always have to make Ahura go, "Oh, Captain, I'm so scared. Please save me." But again, it's the fucking 60s. So I always push back against this idea that Star Trek was some revolutionary thing for women. I mean, insofar that it had women in space, yes, but beyond that, it still portrayed them very poorly. And this was an example. But again, whatever, the 60s, we move on. So we have this big moment for the commercial break. Then they come back after the commercial and figure it all out. Okay, we've got to go back to get McCoy. Spock has been recording images from the Guardian Forever on his 1960s tricorder. But so they were able to kind of estimate when they should go back, and they want to go back before McCoy goes there to try to stop him from doing whatever he did. Spock says it's a rather barbaric period. Okay, Spock, that's just a little bit too much. Come on. Barbaric, the 1930s? Come on. It's so judgmental. He's so judgmental. Fuck you, Spock. Anyway, so at this point, Spock and Kirk jump through the Guardian of Forever. Now, before I move on with my recap, let's take a little time out here to talk a little bit about the Guardian of Forever. As I said, it was really captivating for me as a kid. I am the Guardian of Forever. And it was something that was really fascinating, I think, to everyone who watched it and to the writers and to the people behind Star Trek. They attempted to bring it back, as I actually mentioned last week. They were thinking about bringing it back in Next Generation with some weird plot involving Tasha and Sarek, but ultimately decided, you know what, Guardian of Forever should be for the original series. Let's do our own thing. Actually, they did bring it back for the animated series as well. There is an episode with the Guardian of Forever in the animated series. There's also a non-canon novel that I read related to the Next Generation with it was called Imzadi, I believe, that centered around Troy and Riker, and it was also featured the Guardian of Forever. So everyone was always fascinated by the Guardian of Forever, including fans, writers alike. And then, of course, they did actually finally bring it back in Star Trek Discovery. I know there's mixed feelings on this. I know that my brother does not agree with me for one example, but I personally love what they did with the Guardian Forever, making it into more of an entity that is able to change shape, change form, and yeah, it can take the shape of some dude with a 1920s newspaper or whatever. Like, I think that's great. I think that makes a lot more sense than it just being some weird 60s machine that goes, "I'm the Guardian Forever, look at my steam." I think it makes more sense there would be this sentient entity that can take different forms. So I kind of fucking love what Discovery did with the Guardian Forever, but maybe that's just me. So anyway, that is the Guardian of Forever. I mean, it is certainly one of the appeals of this episode, but far from the only reason why this episode is great. That animated series episode, by the way, the one with Spock in it, I feel that it is the one of the most overrated episodes. In fact, I think I had it on my overrated episode list. I don't think it's really that great because the time travel logic is atrocious. But because it has the Guardian of Forever, people are like, oh, it's good, but it's not. It's really not. But this episode is. So anyway, let's continue forward with the recap. Okay, so Kirk and Spock travel back in time to 1930 America. And Kirk says he's seen this in photographs. So it just shows, again, as a lot of the original series episodes show us, especially the first season ones, how much the world of Star Trek changes and evolves, because certainly by Next Generation, nobody's looking at freaking photographs, and shows that take place at the same time as this Discovery season 1 and 2 and Strange New Worlds, you're not looking at photographs. But they're talking about the Great Depression. Spock again says that is barbaric. Fuck you, Spock. You're so judgmental. Like, seriously, what is your problem? So then they go to steal those clothes, and then this is where they meet the cop. I don't have to get into that whole thing again. Already talked about that. I do, however, want to talk about this whole thing of how they have to explain away Spock's ears. Makes one wonder why Spock is the one who goes back in time. I know he's the one who recorded the thing on his tricorder, but then again, Kirk does say to everyone else, I want each of you to try until we're successful. So other people are going to try even without the tricorder. So how necessary was Spock? He was necessary because he's a main character. In fact, not just a main character, but one of the 3 title characters. So one of the most important characters. So, okay, fine. I think without that factor, it doesn't make a lot of sense for the pointy ear guy to go back into 1930s America. So anyways, let's move past this. We already talked about it. So Kirk and Spock get away from the cop by doing a Scooby-Doo routine. like, I can't believe your wife let you go out like that. Oh, yes, you look horrible. And this Spock does the Vulcan intervention. It's very silly. Then they run away and find themselves a little basement to hide out into. So they talk about how it is that they might be able to go to the same location and same time period as McCoy, like same time period but the same location, because they talk about, oh, McCoy could be anywhere in the world right now. And it's a bunch of poppycock about ebbs and flows of time. It's a bunch of nonsense. However, I am really glad that they addressed it, because to just kind of leave that hanging out there, like, how do they know they're in the same part of the whole big Earth as McCoy is? So I'm happy that they address that, because they don't really address this with other planets. Like they always act like, oh, we're gonna beam down to this planet. It's the only place in the planet that has life, when it's not. I don't know, but so I do like that they addressed that. It shows good, thoughtful writing to me. Then Kirk and Spock are doing some bantering, and Edith Keeler finds them. So when Edith Keeler comes down, this kind of love theme starts playing in the background, but it's a little more subtle than the love theme, like the classic Kirk love theme. The which I just see as extraordinarily cheesy. I don't know how many episodes at this point they had to use that theme. I can think of Shore Leave. They definitely used it, and they used it for Spock too, in that that crappy episode with the flowers, the LSD flowers, the brain rushes everybody. The Site of Paradise, was that what it was called? Yeah, whatever. They use that love music there for Spock, and they definitely have used it for Kirk. And I always think of it as extraordinarily cheesy. but that's not the music that they use. It is definitely a love theme. Like you can definitely get the sense that Kirk and Edith have this connection by the music, but it is much more subtle and it makes a lot more sense. Like the one I was talking about, the it's just too much. It's just over the top. It's just ridiculous. This was more on point. So at first, Kirk's first instinct is to lie to her when she confronts them. Says, "Well, it's cold outside," and she calls him out immediately and says, "It's bullshit. It's not cold outside." Well, what she says is, "It's not very nice when you first meet somebody to lie to them," or something to that effect. And I love how Kirk right away feels compelled to now tell the truth. At least, he's not going to tell about the time travel stuff, but at least so far as, okay, we stole these clothes and a cop was chasing us and we needed to hide out, because he picked up right away that she's going to see through bullshit and that he needs to be truthful to her. And I think he respected that immediately. So right away, there's this mutual respect that they have within their first few moments of meeting each other, because I think she also respects him for telling her the truth. So it's convenient that they happen to be in the basement of what is essentially a homeless shelter. Not really a shelter because it doesn't really have beds there, but like it's a place for homeless people to get food and work. It's the 21st Street mission. And so is rather convenient, but whatever. It's a show. It's just a TV show. So then there's a scene with them eating with some homeless people, and some slimy dude is making sexual innuendos about Edith, and Kirk tells him to shut the fuck up. Then Edith comes out to give a speech. The slimy guy says, like, this is the price we have to pay. We have to listen to her Babel One about her bullshit. And Kirk is like, no, shut the fuck up and listen, motherfucker. Obviously, he doesn't use those terms. So I really like her speech. I think it's, or at least the first part of it. The second part of it, I'll get into in a second, maybe a little much. But the first part of it, where she's talking about how she's not just a do-gooder. If you can't get off the booze, you gotta get out. Like, you need to be able to take care of yourself. I'm not here to do everything for you. I love that because I think it was a very succinct way of defining the character right off the bat. Like right off the bat, you know what kind of person this is. So great character building moment, and it's great writing and great acting to deliver that so succinctly, so that we know exactly who this person is, or at least part of her character. But very important character traits. It might have been laying it on a little too thick when she's like, one day they're going to develop the atomic power and space flight, and man is going to fly into space. And a touch too far, but whatever. Kirk, of course, immediately is captivated by this woman in the 1930s saying all these things, and this is where he says to Spock, "I find this woman to be most uncommon." So then moving forward, Kirk is he's definitely interested. He's into her for sure. So after that point, Edith lets Kirk know that she has a flop for them, and Kirk's like, "What?" And she's like, "Place to sleep." And Kirk says to Spock, "We have a flop," and Spock says, "A what, Captain? A place to sleep? Well, you might have just said that in the first place." So I do actually like a lot of this bantering between Kirk and Spock in this episode. I don't always love the bantering. And then, the whole cop fiasco earlier, like I could have done without that bantering. That was a little too much, but a little of this more light bantering that they do, it really shows the connection that these two characters have, the bond that they have that has been developed over the course of this first season. So I do like it there. It's genuine. It works for me. Also, it creates a good lighthearted feel to really balance out the really heavy thing, the really deep and heavy sadness that is coming later in the episode. So it's a good balance for that. That we do have some lighthearted moments in this episode. So then later they go back to the room, and Kirk eventually buys all the little tubes and stuff that Spock needs. Spock is complaining that he has to figure this out with bearskins and knives. And Edith Keeler comes in and sees the machine. She's like, "What's that?" And more humor, more silliness, lightheartedness with Spock saying, "Ma'am, I'm endeavoring to build a phonemic memory circuit using stone knives and bearskins." She's like, "Whatever, I guess, I don't know." So another little lighthearted moment there. So then after that, Edith catches them stealing tools that they need. And she confronts them. And this is where she then confronts them about just how they're just so out of place. And Spock raises an eyebrow, says, "Interesting. Where do you suppose we belong, Miss Keeler?" And she says to Spock, "You? By his side," pointing to Kirk, "as if you have always been there and always will. And you," she says to Kirk, "another place. I don't know where, I don't know how, but I'll figure it out eventually." So she just shows how insightful she is, and you see Kirk like just being so captivated by this that she has this insight that most normal people wouldn't have, especially for this time period. And then Spock says, "I've finished with the furnace," and Edith Keeler says, "Captain." Even when he doesn't say it, he says it. She's so really insightful. And again, I think Kirk is just smitten with all of that. So then we see Kirk and Edith, walking down the street, having this little romantic little walk. And she asked him why Spock calls him captain. And he says, well, she asked him, were you in the war together? And he says, we served together. So that, he could be truthful there without lying. They serve together. Technically, they still do serve together. She then kind of starts prodding him about that. And she's like, well, what happened with something? Why won't you talk about it? Did something go wrong? Did you do something terrible? And then she says, let me help. And then Kirk cites a novelist who in the future, 100 years in the future, which I guess in 2030, so this novel hasn't been written yet, will use those words, let me help, and use that as a line that, this is what we need to base everything on, like, let me help. We should help each other. But he says this is apparently not an Earth author, because he points to her, the planet that this person comes from. And this is like the classic scene with Kirk having his arm around Edith and pointing up into the sky. And this is one of the only, if not the only, examples of Kirk actually legitimately romancing a lady, where he's actually creating a real connection with a lady, where he's not full of shit, where he actually feels something. He's not just trying to get laid, or not trying to come on to a lady just to for his own purposes, which he often does in the show. Is kind of gross, but he's actually seriously romancing a lady, and the connection that they have is real. It feels real. You can feel the bond between these two characters, and again, amazing acting by William Shatner. I'm just blown away. So he does that, And it's just, yeah, it's not one of his cheesy one-liners and the bullshit that he normally does. And it looks like for a second that they're about to kiss, but they don't. And I kind of love that. Like, I kind of love that they don't have to go, oh, we're gonna kiss, oh, da, 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 da. Like, I don't know, just get really cheesy. They just they share this moment. They share a moment together without having to kiss. And it's way more powerful than if they had kiss. If they had to kiss at this moment. So, speaking of kisses, chef's kiss for that scene. So now let's move forward beyond this. Okay, so then we get to a scene where Spock is working on his little machine that he has created, and he sees a headline that Edith Keeler has been killed. So it took me actually a while to like figure out how it is that Spock is able to see these newspapers, because I never caught the line that he says that he caught images from the Guardian of Forever, and they were going really fast, but he's able to like slow them down with the tricorder. That's how he's able to see this. So he sees that Edith Keeler has been killed in a car accident. And then when Kirk comes in, he was like, well, let me show you this. And then they see a different headline that Edith Keeler is conferring with the President of the United States for this big peace mission, this big peace thing that they're doing. And Spock explains that this is what they've been looking for, because there's two different headlines that show that there's two different possible futures. So McCoy changed something, and one of them is the right one, and one of them is the wrong one, depending on whether Edith Keeler lives or dies. That decides, whether their future exists, whether the Enterprise is still going to be there when they get back. So Kirk, of course, jumps to the conclusion that McCoy must have killed her, and Spock says, or he prevented her from dying. We do not know which one it is. So Kirk says we have to discover it. We have to set things right. And Spock has the line, what if we discover in order to set things right, Edith Keeler must die? And Kirk doesn't answer. He gives this look of despair. This is actual good acting. It's a little subtle. And then dramatic music. And then we cut to a commercial break. On the other side of the commercial break, and of course, I'm assuming commercial breaks. We don't actually see commercials on streaming services, thankfully. I don't. I pay for the non-commercial version. So McCoy appears from the Guardian of Forever, and he's still crazy, and he's yelling, "Assassins! Murderers!" And he's yelling at this homeless man, like, "You! What planet is this?" And then the homeless man, is like scared away by this weirdo, and McCoy starts running after him. "Don't run! I won't kill you. It's they who will do the killing." Oh, then we have another scene with Kirk and Edith developing their relationship again. Like what I said with Jar and Castillo in the episode that I most recently did, yesterday's Enterprise. Like, they don't necessarily have a lot of scenes, but the scenes that they do have, they just make the most of it, and they make that connection where they're both talking about, how peace is important, and like how one day we'll have peace, and blah blah. And saying we speak the same language, and so we get that development, and then we cut back to McCoy confronting this homeless man. He's doing these crazy ramblings, and then he falls over, and the homeless man wants to, steal his wallet or whatever, but instead finds a phaser and accidentally shoots himself. Which I guess that dude wasn't very important because you would think that would change the timeline in some way, but I guess it really doesn't. Maybe that dude was about to die anyways. Who knows? I don't know. Maybe the message of the show is, it's just a homeless guy. They're not that important. I don't know. But anyway, let's not get too caught up on that. So McCoy stumbles into the 21st mission, 21st Street mission, meets Keeler. He's at this point already seems to be coming off the drugs a little bit, but he's still saying, like, I can't let them find me. And Edith Keeler's like, oh, I won't let them find you. And, she can tell he's like high or drunk or something and takes him off. And just Mrs. Spock walks in right after that and just Mrs. McCoy. So then in the next scene, we cut to Spock suddenly has fixed his machine again, even though before he said it was going to take 2 days, but I guess it didn't really have to take 2 days. I don't know. And then he does find out that definitively that Edith Keeler does have to die. This is where he sees all the stuff about Germany. And he's even able to get video footage. That Germany wins World War II because Edith Keeler helped delay the United States entry into the war. And Kirk says, but she was right. And Spock says she was right, but at the wrong time. And this was an extremely important line to include because otherwise it kind of seems like they're saying war is good. So good thing we had that war, huh? But that's not what they said. They said, no, she was right, but unfortunately this was not the time to delay war because Germany took advantage of that and conquered the earth. So and fascism wins and Hitler wins and all that stuff. So I do love that they included that line as extremely important to do that. And then Kirk says to Spock, Spock, I am in love with Edith Keeler. And Spock says simply, duh, I mean, anyone can see that. No, he doesn't say that. He says, Jim, Edith Keeler must die. Dun, dun, dun. And I do the dun, dun, dun out of silliness, but actually it was a really powerful moment. It actually really is. I mean, we kind of know that is going to be what's going to happen, but to actually get it confirmed, it's gut-wrenching. That because the acting has been so well and the development of this connection that they have has been so well that we feel it. We feel it. So knowing that Kirk has to let this person die is gut-wrenching. And you're just dreading seeing it. So then we cut to McCoy having this conversation with Edith after he's gotten some rest, and he definitely seems to be coming off of the drugs, and he still doesn't really. He's like he doesn't really believe where he is, and she doesn't really believe him, and he says that's okay. I don't believe in you either. But they're having a more kind of lighthearted conversation. Then there's a scene where Kirk catches Edith from falling down the stairs, and Spock says, I must point out she might have died then and there. And Kirk has a really good response saying, well, it's not time. McCoy isn't here yet. And Spock says some bullshit. Well, we don't know. Come on. Yeah. You saw in the headline it was a car accident. You know that's not how she dies. So shut up. But it is kind of important to remind Kirk that you do have to let her die. So I understand why that scene is there. So I don't fault it. So because this leads to a really powerful line from Spock where he says, "Save her, do as your heart tells you to do, and millions will die who did not die before." Oh no! Oh no! Okay, so at this point, McCoy has recovered. He still thinks he's hallucinating the whole thing. Like every man drinks from the wrong bottle, she says, and he says, "Not as wrong from the bottle I drink from." And then offers to do something to thank her, and she says, "No, we can talk about it later. My young man is taking me to a Clark Gable movie." She's referring to Kirk, but Kirk doesn't know he's taking her to a Clark Gable movie yet. He hasn't actually checked with her. She hasn't checked with him that he'll do that. She's just assuming. But because she mentions the McCoy about the Clark Gable movie, and he's like, what's Clark Gable? So I guess that the 1701 does not have movie nights like the NX01 did. Thankfully, good for you. The movie nights were so dumb. So they don't know who Clark Gable is, rightfully. Then we get the setup for the scene of Edith Keeler's death, and it starts with Kirk also not knowing who Clark Gable is. And she goes, "Oh, that's funny. Dr. McCoy said the same thing." And he's like, "McCoy!" McCoy. This is where the William Shatner acting comes back into play. The McCoy, he's here. Where is he? This is where my laughing stops. This is where the death scene happens. Now, before I get into the death scene itself, I want to point out, I feel like I have to point out that it does kind of seem like the way this scene is presented, that Edith Killer was never going to get hit by the car if Kirk, Spock, and McCoy weren't all three of them there. Like, it's because she gets distracted watching Kirk and Spock kind of struggle with McCoy, and that's when she gets hit. So what happened in the timeline when Kirk and Spock weren't there and McCoy saved her? Like, what was she distracted by? And then even taking McCoy out of it, she was originally killed because the Nazis didn't win the war, and everything happened the way it did, and the Federation was formed and all that stuff. So what happened in the original timeline? Why was she distracted to get hit by the car? I'm going to do a little headcanon here and just say that it was something else. Like, she still happened to be there. I mean, she wasn't going out with Kirk, but she was still there on that street for a different reason and was distracted by something else, or just simply wasn't paying attention and still got hit by the car. Anyways, I wish they hadn't presented the scene like that, making it look like that it basically was caused because Kirk, Spock, and McCoy, all three of them were there. So it makes you wonder, well, what happened in the original timeline? And this is original time. There was an original timeline because it's been established the timeline has been changed. So this isn't like it always happened, whatever happened type deal. This is definitely a timeline change deal. So what happened in the original timeline? Headcanon. So that's how we have to explain it. I wish they had done a better job at this scene, but whatever. Again, it's the 60s. So, anyways, so now we get to the death scene itself, and we see that Edith is clearly about to get hit. McCoy tries to save her, and Kirk, without looking, like, grabs him and stops him. And that's where McCoy says, I could have saved her. Do you realize what you just did? And then the line that I think is the most powerful of the episode. There's another one that I'll talk about in a few seconds that I think gets more fanfare, but this to me is the most powerful one. And that is when Spock's response to McCoy, do you realize what you just did? Kirk can't speak. He can't. So Spock speaks for him and says, he knows, Doctor. He knows. And it's powerful because the fact that Kirk can't speak, that and they cut to Kirk, and it's actually decent acting by Shatner. He's just in shock. He can't believe he had to do what he just did. And there's no way that he can get the words out himself. So that's why Spock has to speak for him and says, he knows, Doctor. He knows. And to me, this is more powerful than the other line that gets more fanfare that I'll talk about in a moment. Not that the other line isn't great as well, which I'll get to, but the other line is more in retrospect. This is in the moment, and Kirk can't speak. And we're right there in the thick of it. And Spock says, he knows, Doctor. He knows. And in fact, there was a video that I never did where I was going to do the top 10 best and then the top 10, or two different videos, top 10 best, top 10 worst quotes in Star Trek. And this was going to be, I think, my number one or two. I think I hadn't quite decided. It was going to be up there. It was going to be, he knows, Doctor. He knows. Heartbreaking, powerful. It gets me every time. It's so good. Okay. So then they come out of the Guardian of Forever. Scotty says, what happened, sir? You only left a moment ago. And Kirk just says, we were successful. The Guardian of Forever offers him to go anywhere in time. Seems kind of reckless of him, but I guess this is before the temporal Cold War. So he's like, yeah, you guys are cool. You should just go travel in time if you want to. Let me be your guide, he says. But all Kirk can say is, let's get the hell out of here. And that's the other line that people cite as being a really powerful line. Because you can feel the agony, you can feel the torture, the pain that Kirk goes through, and those are the only words that he can say. To me, the other one, because it's in the moment, hits me more, but this is still a big one. And this one, speaking of that, I mentioned the non-canon novel Amzadi. My brother and I always joke about this because we listened to the audio book of that, and Jonathan Frakes was reading it, and he like at the beginning of the novel, they're recounting this scene from The City on the Edge Forever, and the way that Jonathan Frakes reads it, it's like, let's get the hell out of here. So my brother and I have always made fun of that. Let's get the hell out of here. Like, he does a terrible job. I guess that might also affect my feelings in this line. But it's still a powerful line, don't get me wrong. But to me, he knows, Doctor. He knows. But it is still an extremely powerful way to, like, in the episode, they beam up credits. Boom. Boom. Actually, yeah, I would put it up there with the ending of my number 3, which was In the Pale Moonlight. I talked about how that was just such a powerful ending, and then how we just cut to credits, and same thing here. So, like, it just I'm getting verklempt. Talk amongst yourselves. Actually, I'm gonna have to talk amongst yourselves because this is the end of my video. I can't believe it. This is the end of my top 100. Can you believe it? I cannot. This is the end of my top 100. So that is all of it. All 100 of my favorite episodes of Legacy Star Trek, the first 5 Star Trek series up through the early 2000s. I have a separate top 25 for Modern Trek, which you should also check out. You should check out everything. And by the way, if you want to be reminded of what my number 100 through number 2 was, it is in the description below. But I also would love for you to watch those videos too if you haven't already. It's kind of cool. Anyways, we've made it. But we still have a couple more videos to go before the end of the year. Not Star Trek related necessarily, but I have an awards video where I'll do my most overrated, underrated, and worst show of 2023. That will be next week. And then the following week will be my top 10 best shows of 2023. So please subscribe if you have not already. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey. Big shout out once again to Liz Scott and Maddie Jester. More of a shout out to the grand champion Liz Scott, but also to Maddie Jester for playing along with my picture clues and getting them correct. Thank you all to all my subscribers. Thank you all so much. I will see you really soon. Goodbye.